It's been a month since the neighbor's kid went missing. 30 days since everyone's life was changed. 5-year-old girl wearing a blue dress and matching blue shoes, brown hair and eyes, and always looking for sweets. We lived in a pretty quiet and what we thought was a safe suburb. A lot of young families, neighbors that get along and actually like having a chat now and then. Since that day, there was a clear shift. Everyone's become a little wary, unsure if you could trust anyone around. The usual busy park down the road now sat silent, everyone too afraid to let their kids out of their sight in case they followed the same fate as the little girl. It was a cold evening when the alarm was raised. I received a knock on the door, and there was the girl's father, Jim, asking if I had seen his little girl. She was a wanderer, and there were many times I'd caught her in my backyard trying to play with my cat. I could tell by his tone that he was hoping that she had dropped by and I had let her in for some milk or snacks, as I would occasionally do whenever I saw her. I had always let them know whenever I invited her in so they wouldn't be worried, and I guess he was hoping I forgot to let them know. I told him I hadn't seen her that day and my cat was indoors all day because of the cold. He became a little more visibly distressed at the news, and I offered to help him look. His wife was knocking the door on the other side of the street to try and cover more ground quicker, and it was quickly growing dark and the panic was starting to set in. It was nearly dark and there was one more house on the street. We were all together at this point while another couple of neighbors who had volunteered to help were out looking around the park, down drains, and any area that a kid might get stuck in. The mother looked like she'd aged 10 years, the father trying to keep it together, holding on to the last shred of hope that his daughter had visited this last neighbor and maybe they both fell asleep in front of the TV. The neighbor was an old lady who doted on the little girl. She didn't have grandchildren, so she treated the girl like her own. She said she hadn't seen the girl that day, but there was something strange she had noticed. She didn't think anything of it at the time, but she did hear a child screaming earlier, and when she looked out the window she saw a car speeding off. She thought it was a little out of the ordinary. She just put it down to a fidgety child and a frustrated parent. The rest of the night was a blur, screams and sirens. It was a long night. Hope has dwindled this past month. There have been a few false sightings and everyone has been awfully cautious around strangers. Jim and his wife have mostly kept to themselves. They've even been questioned about the disappearance. Jim came over to borrow some tools. He just wanted to keep busy. He looked exhausted. He said how they received a call that morning, which to him signified the beginning of the end. The police had been scanning a nearby lake when they noticed a little blue shoe floating in the water. They thought it fit the description of what the girl was wearing and called the parents to the station to identify the shoe. Jim couldn't be sure if it belonged to his daughter. It was worn and dirty, but his wife was convinced that it couldn't be. Jim suspected that her insistence was based on the hope that their daughter was safe somewhere and not at the bottom of a lake. They were going to send divers out the next day to thoroughly search the lake, but Jim couldn't take the waiting any longer and decided to keep himself busy. I had a pretty big storage shed out the back that I hadn't been in for months, but I knew that I had everything he'd need to keep busy for a few hours. As we approached, I warned him about the clutter. Our packed shelves, stacks of expired paint cans, the usual junk people tend to hoard, so it might take a little while to source all the required tools. He said he didn't mind the extra distraction. We got to the door and I saw it had been unlocked. Maybe I forgot to open it last time. I did keep a spare key in the house, but no one usually came over, so I put it down to my forgetfulness, hoping nothing had been stolen. As we opened the shed doors, we could see the shelf had toppled over. There were so many things everywhere on the ground it was hard to see the floor. We could make out a few broken things here and there, some broken plates, old magazines. As we adjusted to the darkness in the shed, we could see something poking out from under the shelf that didn't make sense, but then again, the shelf falling over on its own didn't make sense. The lack of progress in finding the little girl didn't make sense. The shed door being unlocked didn't make sense. How could there be tiny blue shoes poking out from under that shelf.